her guests.
What a pleasure it is to be in Riyadh and to see everyone at the second Future Investment Initiative Conference. Your Excellencies, Your Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be joined by two giants in the oil and gas industry. Mr. Amin Nasser, CEO of Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil producer, as well as Mr. Paul Kibsgaard, CEO of Schlumberger, the world's largest oil field services provider. Thank you very much for joining me. So in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to ask you first, of course, Mr. Nasser, we'll have the Iran sanctions kicking in, and the world has an assumption that Saudi Arabia has 12 million barrel per day capacity. How solid is that? And what are you doing to ensure that Saudi Aramco delivers?
Thank you, Shingli. Definitely we have the 12 million barrel per day of sustained capacity backed by one of the largest reserves in the world, not only the largest reserve, the highest quality, the lowest cost, and it has also the lowest carbon intensity. Also supported by technical and professional capability. And when the rest of the world during the crisis in 2015 stopped investment in the oil and gas sectors because of low prices, Saudi Aramco continued to invest and maintain potential projects. Khurais will be coming on stream 300,000 barrels per day. It's maintain potential project before the year end. We have a lot of projects ongoing in Zuluf, Marjan, and Berri fields. So the bottom line, we did not rely on increasing depletion rates from our existing fields when prices dropped. We continued to invest and maintain potential. We maintained our low depletion rates, which will helping us, to be honest, to minimize our decline rates. Our decline rate is one of the lowest in industry because of our low depletion rates. Others resolve to higher depletion rates, and with higher depletion rate, you don't need to build new infrastructure. You rely on existing wells, but you're taxing them more, and what we'll end up with is more decline in your existing fields. So that 12 million barrels per day of sustained capacity is solid and can be sustained for the long term.
Right. Now, Mr. Kibsgaard, recently we're starting to notice possibly a slowdown in US shale oil due to the Permian pipeline constraints. How do you see that issue going forward?
Well, first of all, let me thank Amin and Saudi Aramco for the invitation to come here today. We have been in the kingdom since 1938. That's a total of 80 years. We continue to enjoy the partnership and the close friendship we have with Aramco. Now, as for North America shale, North America shale has provided a lot of supply growth over the past 6-7 years. And I think what we're seeing at this stage is that the offtake capacity, as you allude to, and that's both for crude, for gas, and for NGLs, is at present becoming a constraint. This is nothing that the North America land oil field industry can't resolve, but I think it's going to take 12 to 18 months to get it done. I think in that period you'll see some slowdown in the growth, firstly in investment, and secondly also obviously in the production output. So that the growth will slow a bit, and I think that will have some impact on the global market. But I think more longer term, I don't think the surface constraints are going to be the real issues. I think there are, I think growing concerns around what's happening in the subsurface, around the productivity of these wells as you continue to drill up the acreage. And this is something I think the industry needs to continue to study and put R&D into in order to address. So in my view, I think there will be some further production challenges going forward there, which could slow down the growth to a certain extent, although it's a significant resource base that will contribute to global growth.
I want to ask you, Mr. Nasser, about the downstream strategy of Saudi Aramco. Reports say that you have about $100 billion of downstream projects, including the petrochemicals deal with Total that we heard about earlier. You're doing things in China, recent signings. You know, take us through the key drivers behind that rationale.
We had an accelerated transformation program in the company 7 years ago, and the goal is to be the leading energy and petrochemical enterprise. And there is no doubt, if you ask anybody in the industry, Saudi Aramco today is the leading company when it comes to upstream, oil and gas. However, in petrochemicals and up to a lesser extent in refining, we don't have a leading position, even though in refining you could say we're not doing bad. Today we have 5 million barrels per day of refining capacity, participated capacity, but we are looking to grow that to 8 to 10 million barrels over the next 10 years. Part of our strategy is to balance our portfolio. Our portfolio is more into the upstream, which makes it, does not give us the right resilience and flexibility to manage our costs during a down cycle. You will always see during a down cycle, downstream will do a little bit better when oil prices drops compared to the upstream. So we wanted to balance the portfolio between upstream and downstream. Petrochemical, if you look at the latest IEA report, it shows that 30% of the growth in oil until 2030 is going to be coming from petrochemical.
And I think 50%.
And 50% from 2030 to 2050. So significant growth in the petrochemical area. And it's a premium for us to integrate more. When we integrate our refineries with petrochemical capacity, like what we did today, you've seen we signed almost $9 billion with Total in our existing refinery in Jubail City, Sator, to integrate the 400 to 440,000 barrels per day capacity that we have today with a petrochemical. That adds value. It gives us a premium, and also it diversifies our income as a company. Today, we are reliant a lot in terms of our refining capacity into fuels that's mainly used in the transport sector. And we wanted to diversify our sector to get a little bit more into the petrochemical. And that's where our strategy to shift 2 million barrels per day with an aspiration of 3 million barrels per day into petrochemical. And for that, you need to integrate more and more. That will add value. It will make us more robust during different cycles.
More flexible. Right. Paul, we were talking a few minutes ago offline about how technology is driving the Schlumberger business. You know, I'm reading a lot of funky tech jargon like nodal seismic projects, and you were telling me about how artificial intelligence and cloud computing are helping the company. Take us through that.
Well, where we have been focusing our efforts when it comes to technology is really in two dimensions. Firstly, to build out the technology offering that we have as a company. So we now have a total of 20 product lines. So we compete in basically almost all the value streams that are in the oilfield services industry. And the vision behind that is that we believe that the industry needs to move from developing individual standalone technologies into technology systems. And that's where you combine, hardware, you combine it with software, you combine it with the latest operating systems and the digital enablement, both in terms of collaboration as well as what you say, artificial intelligence and cloud computing. So we spent the most effort recently on developing our new generation drilling system, which takes care of everything from the downhole to what's happening on the surface and the rig. And we are moving these efforts now into developing similar type of systems when it comes to completions and fracturing, when it comes to what we do with subsurface modeling and these type of things. So I think developing technology systems is really what's going to create the next, I would say, step change in performance for the industry. And that means that the service industry has got to move away from just developing gadgets to kind of take a more systematic approach to technology development.
Do you want to add the Saudi Aramco picture to how technology is changing oil and gas?
Well, I think our position today is because of technology. Our lowest cost, it's not only because of the quality of reservoirs that we have. We have the lowest cost as a producer compared to others, mainly because of the use of technologies. And technology is really changing. If you come and visit our headquarters, you'll find out we geosteer every drill bits in the kingdom in more than 250 rigs, utilizing satellites from one center in Dhahran. And that was not possible in the past. Today, if you look at our OSPAS center, everything is integrated through fiber optics and data analytics and using supercomputers to manage everything that you have, from terminals to the tankers that's being loaded to the plants that being optimized from one huge center. And we added to that the fourth Industrial Revolution Center that we have. Every equipment that we have has a sensor today. That sensor, through temperature, pressure, and vibration, allow us to optimize and understand the performance of these equipment before they start to fail. So we can intervene and bring these equipments down if necessary before they have catastrophic failures. All of this made possible through technologies, data, satellites, data analytics, the Internet of Things, the fourth Industrial Revolutions. Without these, today, pipelines, we use drones to survey and inspect pipeline. We use robotics for inspection. So all of these technologies put together, including what we use in the subsurface. Subsurface technology improved quite a bit. People think that we drill a well and oil will come to the surface. You know, today you have multilaterals with inflow control devices that helps you to reduce the amount of water, capitalize on the pressure on the subsurface, bring only crude at a much lower energy. So it brings your energy intensity down, at the same time it maximizes your productivity. All made possible through technologies made by our partners like Schlumberger and others. So we have great advantage in you capitalizing on these technologies, looking at the long term for always when we do an investment, and it pays at the end.
I'm glad you mentioned energy intensity, because climate change is a huge issue. We've got the International Maritime Organization's sulfur cap coming on. We've got more pressure from governments to reduce their energy intensity. And we've got consumers being very, very aware of the issues. But at the same time, you think that oil is so critical to our lives, as we heard from previous sessions. And the key is not about demonizing oil and celebrating all other forms of energy, but in fact making oil more competitive. Tell us your thoughts.
Thank you. Definitely, climate change is a challenge for humanity at all, and we are committed to the Paris Agreement. It is a focus area not only for Saudi Aramco, for the rest of the industry, but in Saudi Aramco, as I say, technology helped us a great deal. If you look at what we have done since the 70s, a number of things. Since the 70s, we stopped flaring gas. So, and this was confirmed by the World Bank, giving us the top ranking when it comes to flared gas. Following that, we started to look at our system and to see how we can further also improve on our energy intensity. Today, if you look at the Science journal, which was published recently in August this year, a study led by Stanford, if you look at the Nature journal, it gives Saudi Arabia and Saudi Aramco in particular the lowest when it comes to energy intensity. In the Science journal, we were second to Denmark. And this did not come because of our oil is as good as any other oil. Energy intensity requires a lot of investment. It has to do with standards. Based on standards, if you have good equipment, they will emit less. If you have good preventive maintenance program, you will emit also less. If you have a flare recovery, in addition to stopping flaring, you have a flare recovery mechanism, you will be emitting less. So we are, for us, climate change is important. We are addressing it with the rest of the industry, either by having carbon capture and sequestration like what we have done in Uthmaniyah. We're taking CO2 from Hawiyah plant and sequestering it in Uthmaniyah plant. We are looking at technologies today that will convert CO2 to useful products, which is very important for the industry. We are looking at also technologies in terms of shifting chemicals to pipes or construction materials, so reducing your carbon footprint. At the same time, as working in partnership with the rest of the industry, we have the OGCI, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, where we are 10 companies joined recently by 3 more companies, which is Chevron, Exxon, and Oxy. We had, it's a CEO-led organization, so we meet 6 times a year. We have 150 experts from the group, the 10 companies. That group will increase now. We have a fund, climate change fund. It's the purpose of the fund is to reduce the carbon footprint. So $1 billion, and that will grow now to $1.3 billion with the 3 additional companies. So as an industry, climate change, the impact of climate change is a focus area, and we will continue to reduce our carbon footprint going forward. But going back to your question about oil and gas, I believe that oil and gas will continue to play a significant role over the long term. If you look at today at electric vehicles, just in 2017, the number of electric vehicles added with a lot of subsidy in 2017 is 1.2 million. How much they offset from oil demand? 30,000 barrels. What is our total requirement? 100 million barrels. The world demand is 100 million barrels. What we need every year between additional demand and decline, 3 to 3.5 million barrels of natural decline in our existing fields, this is globally, and 1.5 million barrels of additional demand, 5 million barrels, 30,000 barrels is not going to really make it. My point is electric vehicles, solar, wind, hydro will continue to grow, and I think we need all sources of energy. If you look at Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is the biggest investor in electric car, in Tesla, you heard His Excellency today, Yasir Mayan, talking about Lucid. We are in solar, we are in wind, and we are in nuclear. In gas alone, even though it costs us more per million BTU or per barrel of oil equivalent to produce gas, we are bringing more gas, even though we have, as a kingdom, 260 billion barrels. 260 billion barrels. I was asked a couple of weeks back in New York by NGOs about the support that we give to renewable and electric. I said the kingdom has 260 billion barrels, 300 trillion scf of gas, and we are one of the biggest investors in renewable, in electric vehicles, and in nuclear.
You're also working with automakers to make internal combustion engines more.
Internal combustion engine, it's very important. You're bringing a good point. We have 2 of our centers. We have 9 centers, technology centers. 1 in Detroit and 1 in Paris out of the 9 centers are dedicated to work with the auto manufacturer in Europe and the auto manufacturers in the US. Our goal is to reduce or to increase mileage per gallons, increase the efficiency, or change the fuel formulation to reduce the carbon footprint. So we have a huge investment in order to make cars, internal combustion engine car, more efficient to reduce impact or reduce our carbon footprint. So there is a lot of investment by the industry, by individual companies, how much we put in climate change related issues by making sure our emissions is kept to minimum is a huge investment. And that will continue over the long term.
Paul, you want to come in on this? What's Schlumberger doing to reduce its carbon footprint?
Yeah, we obviously have specific efforts around the products and services and the projects that we do for our customer base all around the world. We have specific measures that we publicize in our filings and so forth in terms of how we are focusing on reducing the environmental impact that we have. And in addition to that, we have had special R&D efforts going into carbon storage, which is quite important if we can find safe ways of storing the carbon underground. We have things around geothermal that we work on, and we also focused on freshwater production, which is also scarcity in the world. So we have specific programs building on what our core capabilities are, which has to do with drilling wells and doing measurements and analysis of what's going on in the subsurface. And then obviously we work closely with our customers like Saudi Aramco on supporting them in also minimizing their carbon footprint.
Finally, I cannot have a conversation with Mr. Nasser without asking about the mother of all IPOs, which business journalists have been speculating about for the past couple of years. The valuation, the size, the timing, which market, and now, does it need to happen? Does the fact that it doesn't need to happen matter? What does it say about the Saudi Arabian economy?
Yeah. I think as highlighted by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and by His Excellency, the Minister of Energy, Industry and Mineral Resources, His Excellency Khalid Al-Falih, before that the government remained committed to the IPO. Now, the timing will depend on the conditions of the market and other factors, but the commitment is there. But the government did a lot of things to facilitate the IPO going through. What happened is that there is a major transaction that's currently going on, which is the
SABIC
acquisition of strategic interest in SABIC from Public Investment Fund, and we are currently in negotiation. You cannot list Saudi Aramco while you are going through a major transaction like that. You need, after we finalize the deal with the BIF, we need a regulatory approval, and there is a lot of requirement, antitrust requirement that needs to be met before, and we need to reflect, after we close the deal, we need to reflect that in our balance sheet before we can go to our investor to show what is the added value and the benefit and the synergy extracted through this major investment. But definitely the commitment is there. Aramco became, to facilitate the IPO, Aramco became a joint stock company effective January this year. The board was changed to prepare for that. There is a new bylaws, a new fiscal regime, capital markets reform happened in advance to prepare for all of that. So all the elements required to list Saudi Aramco were done by the government. The question is, we need to go through the process now with this transaction, which is something great, for the company, especially with the strategy that I talked to you about, our aspiration to be the leading global company when it comes to petrochemical. Today, when you look at petrochemical, out of the world demand, we are less than 4% as Saudi Aramco. SABIC is a great company. It exists in 50 companies. It has a global position. It's number 4 or 3 globally when it comes to chemicals. And it has good technologies in certain chemical chains. And it's a great addition to Saudi Aramco to meet its aspiration to be the global leader when it comes to chemical.
So once that goes through, the IPO will happen?
As I said, the government will decide based on market conditions, but His Royal Highness and His Excellency highlighted something around the end of 2020 and 21, so somewhere in that range, depending on the process, because you don't know when the antitrust and the regulatory process for a transaction that big in 50 countries, how long that will take. So all of that will take time before a decision that the company, and we need to reflect all of that in our balance sheet to be able to show it to the investor, to show, as I said, all the integration and the synergy created by this acquisition.
Great stuff. And I am seeing that we're running out of time. It's always hard to do a session right before lunch, but thank you for being a wonderful audience, and a big round of applause for our wonderful guests, Mr. Amin Nasser, CEO of Saudi Aramco, and Mr. Paul Kibsgaard, CEO of Schlumberger. Thank you so much.